Well, good morning, everybody. At the moment, there's just the two of us, so we'll just wait for a second until, yep, here we go.
People are trickling in.
That's exactly right. Excellent. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Corinne Podger, and I'm the Senior Manager for Programs and Education here at the Walkley Foundation. Very warm welcome to those of you joining us for today's session, where we'll be looking at solutions journalism to strengthen relationships with audiences and communities. I have such great pleasure in introducing Alan Arthur, who will be our trainer for today and has been looking after online audience engagement for the Solutions Journalism Network, as well as developing training around this topic, not just for us, but for other news organisations. I've had a preview of the training materials, and they're both super interesting, but also a lot of fun. And so I think we can prepare for 90 minutes of something that will be not only helping you to do your jobs, but will be super, super enjoyable. So Alan, if you would like to perhaps make a gentle start, introduce yourself, and then we'll get started. You're on mute. There we
You
go.
okay? You'd think after 4 years of this, I would be
Yeah, I know.
on it, but
If
here
we
we
if we
are.
all had $1 for every time we've heard the phrase "you're on mute," over to you.
Yes. Well, thank you all so much for coming. Everybody who's here, I can't see you, but I feel you. And thank you if you're watching this afterwards on the recording. Thank you for tuning in. I am going to try to make this enjoyable. I think the great thing about solutions journalism and audience engagement and community engagement is that it's actually really enjoyable and fulfilling in ways that I've found other types of journalism just can't quite reach. So I want to help you get to that. With today's session. So it has a lot of there's some interaction. So stay tuned, keep alert because I will probably be asking you questions. So I'm just gonna
Just
start
as you're
sharing
doing, just
screen
as you're
here.
doing that, actually, Alan, I will mention, please go ahead and share. Folks, the chat box is set up so that you can chat with each other. So when you send a little message in the chat box, just make sure that in the blue screen you select not just host and panelists, but everyone. And we really do encourage you, if you feel that you have time, to introduce yourself. Let us know where you're joining us from, whereabouts you work, and perhaps a topic or a question that you really want as a burning thing to take away from today. And you can put questions into the chat box as you go. So that's a way of also interacting with each other. So just make use of the chat box. Excellent.
Yes, I'm sure we'll be tuning in to the chat and trying to answer questions as we go. So the first thing you can put in the chat also, along with an introduction of yourself, is what's something you find terribly underrated? Doesn't have to be journalism uh, industry related at all. What's something you just find very, very, very underrated? Sleep, totally underrated. I will also share mine. What's good for you is good for me. My answer is the same always. It's Carly Rae Jepsen. She's terribly underrated. Amazing songwriter, amazing performer, and all people know her for is Call Me Maybe. It's very unfortunate. Anyway, recipe books. I love this. Good answer, Petra. Recipe books. Anybody else want to share? Comfortable shoes. I love it. I just bought a new pair of shoes for a race I'm going to be running, and they are life-changing. I have to agree with this. All right, keep adding to what you think is terribly underrated. Feel free to introduce yourself. And I'm going to ask you another question that you can add to the chat. We're throwing a lot at you, so you can answer whatever you like to begin with. But this is actually journalism related. So, what is something that's in the news or that people are talking about a lot that you do not understand? If someone asked you to explain it, you could not do it. And again, I will gladly offer myself up as a an example here. Um, Hedge funds, great example. Underrated reducing social media. Yes, absolutely. Um, and I say this as somebody who works largely with social media, but I agree with that. Something I don't understand, I do not understand how the United States makes its budget. I don't get it. I read about it all the time. I do not understand it. I don't get it. If someone asked me, how does the US design a budget? How do they put things in and out? How does that work? The debt, amazing example. How does the debt work? It just seems to keep going up. Do we pay it? I have no idea. It just keeps going, right? So we've got government debt, we've got hedge funds, which are very important, economics in general, 100%, totally. Something that greatly influences our life that we do not understand. The current media crisis, that's a good one. I don't mind that that's on the nose. That's fine. Um, Economics, yes. So we have all of these things, and everybody has something like this. And we'll talk about why that's important. Everybody has something that is very, very prevalent in the news. Maybe it's political stuff, how things are decided in various houses of government, economic stuff. I mean, I for sure could not describe to you how Bitcoin works. I do not understand it at all. I have read so much to try to understand it. I have no clue how it works. So even if you don't put it in the chat, just think about that thing that you're like, oh, this is really important. I don't understand it. Um, so we will come back to that. That's important. But the session today is about using solutions journalism to strengthen audience and community relationships. And I promise that this question of what's something huge that you don't understand is relevant to this. Um, so who am I? I am Alan Arthur. I am the engagement director for the Solutions Journalism Network. And I have been there for almost 5 years. In about 3 weeks, it will be 5 years. I love it. It's great. I get to teach people about solutions journalism all day and talk about it all day, and talk about meaningful engagement, which is some of what we're going to talk about today. But I also like to tell people that I don't just talk about solutions journalism, I do solutions journalism. I am a freelance journalist for the past 6 or 7 years now. I work mainly with people who are or have been incarcerated. And I do solutions journalism frequently around that, the issues they face. So I talk to people who are helping people stay out of prison. I talk to people who are running programs inside. I talk to people who are helping folks return home, and I try to cover that through the lens of what's working, who's having some success with this, and I will tell you that truly adopting that approach really transformed my relationship with that community. So a lot of what I'll share with you is from working with other newsrooms, but it's also from personal experience trying to use solutions journalism as a way in to deeper conversations, to richer conversations, to deeper, more trusting relationships, which is really what we need right now. I could talk for 3 hours about the causes of the current media crisis, but I won't do it. I'll resist the urge. So the agenda for today is the following. How do we know what we know / don't know? We're going to talk about journalism and well-being. This may sound strange. I promise it is relevant to you. We're going to talk about your community's brains. They all have brains and they want to use them, despite what some journalists think. I promise you, they want to use them. We're going to talk about having goals and making them explicit. Um, and they may not be the kind of goals when you think about your typical journalism goals. I'm going to try to push you into a place where you think about goals a little bit differently. We're going to talk about listening because you can't have a healthier relationship with your community if you're not listening. We're going to make a circle with your community where you're making a loop, where you're listening to them and trying to deliver the info that they need. And then you get to grill me at the end if you want with questions. But you can also grill me the whole time in here. You can drop questions into the chat. Totally totally fine with that. Um, Great. So, part one, how do we know what we know and don't know? We often look to this sort of vague idea of editorial judgment to make these decisions, but think back on that thing that you don't understand. We are all smart journalists who cover these things all the time. We are in the newsrooms or we are talking to journalists in newsrooms. We consume a lot of news probably, and we still don't understand something that is really important, like the economy or, um, you know, cryptocurrency or how government procedures work. And yet, often the reporting is very high level. Um, we are talking about the ins and outs and the soap opera sort of drama of politics. But that's not really the information people are looking to journalism for. They are looking for information that helps them navigate their lives, that help them navigate the systems that they face. And as we report on this stuff and kind of miss this info that we need, part of the reason we miss it is because we are often focusing on problems and nothing else. We ignore options for service journalism. We ignore options for solutions focuses. We ignore explainers, or we think, oh, people get this. They don't want that. They want more drama. They want more conflict. All these ideas in journalism that we think are what people want. And largely, they are not. They generate clicks, but they don't generate what you need to actually build up a loyal audience that comes back to you all the time or that has faith in you and confidence in your reporting. Um, and when we are focused only on problems and when we are focused only on the kind of inside, well, I don't know if this expression is relevant in Australia, but we say inside baseball. It's this sort of backroom, um, uh, wonky kind of reporting on the ins and outs of such and such when people don't understand the basics, um, and the info is not relevant to them. We struggle to persuade them that what we're doing is relevant to their life. People want to see journalism that benefits them in some way. And hearing about drama and chaos and trouble and problems and disaster all the time, people tune that out. And we'll talk more about that in the well-being section. But they don't see this as relevant to their lives because we're not bringing them the information that they actually need. So the first step, like in many things, is admitting that we have a problem. We have to accept that people who are avoiding the news, that people who are mad at the news, are making a very rational choice from their perspective and that they kind of have a point. Now, that's not to say there are not bad actors who exploit people's rage with news or exploit anger against the press. Not saying that. That's objectively true. But a lot of people care very deeply about what's happening in their communities and they tune out because they don't understand what the journalism they see has to do with bettering their community, helping them understand their community, helping them understand issues and solutions. They are making a choice, and that choice is rational to disengage from journalism. Again, not that there aren't people who fan the flames of that, but a lot of people are making a very rational decision. When you accept that, it can very deeply transform how you interact with people, even your sources on your beat, because suddenly their nerves or their skepticism seem less like an obstacle to your reporting and more of a learning opportunity and a chance to connect with them and say, I can't tell you how often I say, I'm skeptical too. I totally understand. This is weird to talk to a journalist. I get it. Um, let's talk about that. And having that conversation can be very meaningful just as a place to start. And then more broadly, as you look at audiences, if you see them as people in your community who who hate you, who don't care, it can be very hard to build relationships with them. But if you see them as people who are making a rational decision and making a healthy choice for themselves to disengage, you suddenly start to think, well, what else do I need to do to bring them the information they need? How can I find out what they want to know? Which brings us to journalism and well-being. Now, I want to say before I start this that well-being does not mean happiness. Well-being does not mean feeling good all the time. Uh, Well-being has a lot of definitions psychologically that people still debate, but generally it means a sense of feeling important and valuable and efficacious in the world. That is what people really need from pretty much everything. That's always what we're looking for. Uh, does this make me feel important? Does this make me feel valuable? Does it make it feel like my time is well spent? And do I feel as though I can navigate the world a little bit better because of this thing? So in the chat, drop your answers. Which of the following is a key aspect of well-being? So A is awareness, B, self-efficacy, C, urgency, or D, creeping sense of dread. I've sort of tipped you to the answer. Okay, a couple votes for B here. Ooh, we got an A, awareness. D in the long run. A, we got a couple A's. Yes, well, awareness is big in journalism. Urgency is big in journalism. A creeping sense of dread, for sure. We have a lot of that in journalism. But according to research, the answer is B, self-efficacy. So what does that mean? Well, oops. So there was a question about like, what does self-efficacy actually mean? Self-efficacy means that, again, kind of, there's some debate about it, but essentially it means that you feel that your actions have some meaning to them, that you are capable of creating some kind of impact in the world around you. Most people who feel serious depression have very low self-efficacy. They feel that nothing they do makes any difference. It doesn't need to be in a big macro sense of can I change the world? But does it matter that I am nice to my neighbor? Well, it doesn't really matter that much at the end of the day. Who cares? The world's just sort of mean and cruel, and it's just another, what's one nice gesture? Who cares? It's a sense that your actions and your presence has some value and makes some impact into the world. There's something different because of you. Well, it turns out that a bunch of researchers have studied this around journalism. And what they found, and you'll get a little email with this info, and this research is linked in there. What they found was that reporting overwhelmingly on problems all the time actually makes people less likely, rather than more, to believe that these problems are solvable. So take a problem like climate change, right? Journalists go out and they believe, I'm going to tell the world how horrible climate change is. And when everyone hears how bad it is, they'll be inspired to take action. Well, research suggests that that's actually the exact opposite. It makes people feel hopeless that the problem can actually be solved. So we find ourselves in a bit of a bind where we're actually reporting the way we think we're supposed to. We report in the way that gets all the awards. We're going to uncover the worst thing we can find. And actually what happens is if we only do that, or we primarily do that, people actually start to think that the problem can't be solved. That's a huge issue. Think about gun violence. Think about whatever the problem is in your community. Reporting on the problem over and over again starts to deflate people's sense that there is something you can do about it. And catastrophe framed reporting reduced intentions to take positive actions to address issues and resulted in negative affect. Now, I'm not super concerned about affect. I think that's something that can blow with the wind. But this idea of people sort of losing agency, of us draining them of their agency and their hope that a problem can be solved, is a big problem for journalism. And what happens is people then say, well, journalism does not contribute to my sense of well-being in this world because it makes me feel hopeless. It makes me feel like I can't do anything, my community can't do anything, none of this will get solved, and we're all screwed. That's a big problem. People will say, I'm not going to consume that. I'm certainly not going to pay for it. That you want me to pay money for this feeling that I have? That's not going to happen. The good news is there are lots of antidotes. One most relevant to us today is consistent quality solutions journalism reporting. In that same study that found that catastrophically framed stories reduce people's intent to take action and reduce their belief that a problem can be solved, the same study found that constructive journalism and solutions reporting done well can counteract that, and that people actually find it to be just as valuable journalistically as the problem-focused stories, if not more. There was no question around whether this journalism was rigorous or not, so long as it was actually done that way. If you want to try to pass off a cat dialing the fire department as a solutions journalism story, people will see right through that. But if you actually go out and report on how a community is reducing wildfires and what other communities can learn about it, people really, really respond to that. And the benefit of it is not mood or affect, because there's plenty of that on the internet. You can go watch any video that makes you happy, but you'll find it's a bit like eating a cheese puff or something like that. You feel good for a second, it dissolves in your mouth, and then you kind of are back to feeling the same way you just did. We don't necessarily need to make people happy. What we need to help people feel is some sense of agency, that problems are solvable, and that their actions around them have some meaning and value. So the lesson here to start is that reporting on problems is totally needed. You can't do any solutions reporting until people are aware of a problem. But it is only part of our job. And reporting that doesn't help people feel some connection to possibility, that things could be different, will never feel valuable to them. So as we think about building relationships with your community, you have to think about their sense of well-being. Does my reporting actually contribute to a sense that maybe this community can be better, that we can address the issues we face? And whether that's local or national or international, we have to start thinking about that. It's a key point of communication, and journalists have to embrace their role as communicators and think about this kind of stuff. So as you're thinking about the relationship with your community, as you're thinking about, the first section, why people tune out, think about how might I contribute to their well-being? Can I do reporting, solutions focused, constructive, more complex, not so black and white, binary? How can I dig in there? Can I provide them some kind of service? Maybe lots of people in my community are looking for a certain kind of information. Or I reported on how something is really frustrating locally to people. Maybe there's a resource out there that can help them navigate it. Or I can provide them an explainer that helps them navigate this local government system or this regional government issue. So it sounds strange. Sometimes journalists think, how am I supposed to contribute to well-being? But I promise, as soon as you start looking elsewhere, other than just problems, all of this stuff um, starts to um, become a bit more clear, and you'll see opportunities for this everywhere. So then we get to your community's brains. Whoops. And I have another trivia question for you. I'm not going to explain the question. True or false, research suggests that people who identify as conservative have larger amygdalas than those who are more liberal. I will not tell you what the amygdala does. I will just tell you it's a part of the brain. I see a false. I see a false. I see a false probably. I see a false. Got a lot of falses. Oh, false. Fiona says true. Petra says no idea. We got another true. Okay. All right, here we go. Last answers. True! It's true. It's true. Yep. Sorry, everybody. True. So, the heck is an amygdala? Well, the amygdala is the part of the brain that it contributes greatly to fear and perception of threats. It helps us make snap judgments, particularly based on race or gender. It's connected to hyperarousal. Hyperarousal is a state that people find themselves in when they have post-traumatic stress disorder. And research shows it happens when people consume too much journalism. That's a bad sign, that we're giving people something approaching PTSD from reading our work. Um, and there's a fun fact. There's something that happens when you get the amygdala all riled up, which so much of our journalism does right now. It actually turns off your prefrontal cortex, which is the part that helps you decision make rationally, to stop and go like, can I see this from the other person's perspective? How can we cooperate? How can we work together? Maybe we can solve this problem. And it turns that off. So again, think about something like climate change, or think about a problem in your community. Most of these big, kind of difficult to crack problems require some measure of cooperation. But when we alarm people, we actually turn off the part of their brain that helps them cooperate. So that would be a problem. That's a problem for us. Yes. Oh, my son is going to make an appearance. Yes, sir. It's in your closet. Okay. Okay, I have a 6-year-old and he's about to go to his first baseball. So we are outraging people. We think that's going to drive them to solve a problem. We think urgency, as we talked about earlier, and this creeping sense of dread is going to galvanize people to action. We actually make them less likely to cooperate and less likely to work together and less likely to see the other person as somebody who is a potential collaborator in addressing this. That's bad if you need a problem that requires a lot of cooperation to solve, like the big ones we face now. Now, I should say before I go on that, you know, as far as the research goes on this, it doesn't mean it's hard to know a chicken or the egg kind of thing. Are people born this way? Does things that happen to us or things that we consume in terms of media affect our amygdalas? We don't know this. We just know there seems to be some correlation with people who have more conservative political views and the size of their amygdala. They tend to be people who see things through a lens of um, uh, what could go wrong, that there's danger in these things. I mean, if you think about why people talk about carrying guns, They may say, I'm not afraid of anybody, but the reason they carry the gun is because everybody else has guns. They don't want to be the only one without a gun. They tend to have this, they tend to be a bit more, certainly not exclusively, but maybe a bit more um, judgmental around different demographic lines, around race or gender, things like that. And it's not to say that they are less able to think about stuff or more able or whatever. It's not a value judgment on them. It just seems to be that people's brains are wired in this way. Now, that is not uh, hopeless. You can actually do something about that. So what's really wonderful is there's all this study of narrative out there in the world. And what they find is that people have different values. Some people value freedom more or their own autonomy more. Some people value contributing to the collective more. Some people value, they want to know about all these problems. Some people value being a bit more forward thinking. Some people value integrity. Some people value on and on and on. So, but it generally breaks down into these sort of contrasting values. And one great thing about solutions journalism is that it lets you start with a shared goal. So almost everybody wants drinkable water. Almost everybody wants better education. Almost everyone wants safer communities. Almost everyone doesn't want flooding from climate change. Maybe there are people out there who are like, well, if some community floods, I don't care. But that's probably not who you're talking to. 80 to 90% of people generally, if you said, could you give better would you wave a wand and give better quality education to every kid in this community? They would say yes. Maybe 10% of them would say, no, this color doesn't deserve it, or this gender, whatever. But that's not primarily who you're talking to. You can talk to most people around a shared goal. And there's a great example of this, Santa Cruz Local in California, where I am. I didn't say that at the beginning. I'm based in Los Angeles, but Santa Cruz Local did this wonderfully during the kind of the height of Black Lives Matter in the United States. There was obviously a lot of talk, and there's still a lot of talk around law enforcement and how necessary they are in many situations, the racial disparities and things, the violence, whether the violence that they address makes up for the violence that they cause. And Santa Cruz Local decided to do a podcast about it. And they did something that was really smart that I love. They said, how do we reduce harm in law enforcement? And in the podcast, you'll hear, if you listen to it, I link to it, I believe, in the resources, it's not just about civilians. It's also about, wait, if we put police in dangerous situations where they're confronting people with guns all the time, where they feel they have to shoot, aren't they in danger too? Don't we want them to be safe also? And so they frame it around, how do we help everybody involved in what could be a police interaction get out safely? And it's very, very smart. And they got a great reaction to it because people who saw this and said, well, I actually don't really care about criminals, quote unquote. I actually want the police officers to be safe because I support them, heard something in there that was for them. And the people who said, I don't want the police running roughshod over my community, doing whatever they want, heard something in there for them as well. So they started around a shared goal. And that's something that solutions reporting lets you do. Instead of saying education is bad and here's the thing that's making it bad, you can go into a school and say, hey, this school is doing really well. I bet we all want this school to do well, right? Here's how it's doing well. Here's what we can learn from it. And there was research from a large media research organization in the US called Smith Geiger, and they found that, as it turns out, in two different studies that they did, uh, solutions journalism, the demand for it, transcended all these different demographic fault lines, as we say, political party, age group, geography. They did it all over the US, their research, and they found that it didn't really matter where people were, and largely it didn't matter what their political beliefs were. They were interested in the solution stories because everybody disagrees about what the problem is, but a lot of people agree on what a solution might look like. They don't know what the solution is quite yet. But when you report on it, you give them an option. Hey, this is one way of looking at this, one way we might be able to address this. And that was intriguing. There's also a deep skepticism among conservatives right now that all the bad news reporting we do is intentional to keep them afraid, that we are trying to control people in some way. Now, we could argue the merits of that, but that is their feeling on this, that there is an agenda around this. And interestingly, people on the left feel pretty much the same way. That I was just at an event that was very progressive leaning, and people kept saying, well, the media wants us to be terrified all the time so that we're very subservient, and they want to push an agenda, and they want to push us into war. They want to make us afraid of each other. And if you talk to conservatives, they say largely the same thing. It's actually something that they agree on. And so when you start reporting on solutions, you can kind of get past that a little because they go like, wait, what? You don't want us to be afraid? Solving this might actually be possible? So we have to accept that as you are out in your community, that there are people who get information differently. They value different things. Just yelling the problems out, some number of people are going to see the problem and go, oh my gosh, I have to do something about that. But a large number of people are going to either tune out if you keep doing that, or they're going to say, oh, there's nothing I can do about that. Or they're going to say, you're just trying to make me afraid. It's not really that bad. How could everything be this terrible? You're blowing it out of proportion, all that kind of stuff. Solutions reporting offers you one way. And again, I like to include all sorts of other ways, like service journalism and explainers and meaningful engagement that we're going to talk about, to help people bring people in and give them information in other ways. They may have other values, they may have other ways that they learn about things, and a sort of one size fits all approach of problem, 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 and hoping it gets solved is not going to connect with those people. So we have to think about, who are we writing for? Yes, maybe we need to cover the insider government thing, but maybe we also need to help people locally figure out how to vote. And when you help them vote, interestingly, they start to care about the other stuff a little bit more too. So think about all the different kind of layers of information that people need. Where are they on their kind of journey with this issue? What might they need to know? And how might we get it to them in a way that's actually responsive to how they consume information, how they understand information is valuable to them? Now we get to goals. Another true or false question for you. People need a sense of meaning and well-being for their brains to make sense of external stimuli. So stuff is coming at you, and your brain needs to make sense of it, and your brain either will or will not be better at processing that information if you have a sense of meaning and well-being. I see some truths. Truths. Lots of truths. It helps. True, lots of truths. Another true. Here we go. True. You're all right. This time you all got it. It's true. Some relief there. So this is interesting to me. I love this. This is from the Arizona Daily Star, uh, they had a reporter in Tucson named Caitlin Schmidt, who is awesome. And they did an interview about why they created a solutions beat for Caitlin to basically lead. And she tells this story that they were at a local retirement community and someone asked, "Why do you hate Tucson?" And they were kind of, I talked to her about this more one time, and she said, our first response was, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, all you do is report about what's wrong, how bad the city is, how bad everybody's doing, how bad the politicians are, how bad the conditions are, bad, 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 bad." Now, to them, they were doing their journalistic mandate, right? They were delivering this absolutely essential information for people, watchdogging, uncovering problems, all the stuff you learn in journalism school that's supposed to be the fundamental core of our work. And to everybody else, it looks like they hate them. I mean, think about that for a second. That's tough, right? And there's a reason he thought that. Again, I maintain it's totally rational. People decide what to trust not just based on whether your reporting is factual or not. If I could rip journalists away from one belief with my bare hands, it would be that factual reporting is enough to win people's trust. It is not. Trust in your community is going to come from a lot of different things. But a big one is that if you don't explain to your community why and how you are doing your reporting, they will make assumptions about it. Trusting News in the United States, I think I linked to something that they wrote in this doc that you'll get. They talk about this all the time. If you leave something blank, people will fill it in with whatever they believe. So if they see you publishing negative stuff about their community all the time, they assume you hate them. If they see you publishing negative stuff all the time, they assume you want them afraid. And then they say, "Why do they want us afraid?" And that's when they start thinking you have all of these agendas that I have never really seen journalists have. But that's how people feel. They
Alan,
want,
I
yeah,
might just chip in just for 1 second because I think
sure.
this is a really useful moment to perhaps resurface one of the fundamental, like the foundation elements of solutions journalism, which is how is it different from public relations or advocacy? So if we're saying, to hold power to account or in an area where there are lots of problems, to cover those in a way that brings those to public attention is important. And so I guess I'm just asking you how to strike that balance so that we're not talking about doing puff pieces or fluffy pieces or
Of
happy
course,
feel-good
yeah.
pieces. Yeah, thanks.
Well, like I said, the puffy, fluffy pieces are not going to make people build trust with people. People can see through that very quickly. A key pillar of solutions journalism is covering the caveats and limitations of a solution, of being very candid and saying, this is not the only solution. It's probably not the best solution. It's certainly not going to fix everything all at once, or what we would call a silver bullet solution. It's not going to solve the whole problem. But it is one option for dealing with this, and it may have lessons in dealing with this problem that others can learn from. And what's really wonderful about this, and it's something that I will steal from Christine McLaren, who used to be at Reasons to Be Cheerful, which is a wonderful solutions outlet that was co-founded by David Byrne of Talking Heads. Bonus points for that. Um, they, she said, what's wonderful about solutions reporting is that it's one thing to report the problem. People need to know about the problem. They can't do anything about it until they know about it. But solutions reporting lets people know that it doesn't have to be this way. The first response of every politician is, we're doing the best we can. That's not really a problem. There's nothing else we can do. They want to take the accountability off of them. But when you report solutions, hey, another community solved this problem. Another city solved this. Another country solved this. Another region solved this. Or they made progress. They've solved it 80% of the way, and we've solved it 30% of the way. Why? Why do they get to live better than we do? And when you start opening up the possibility of, hey, wait a second, it does not have to be this way, uh, that is when accountability starts to also get some teeth to it. It's one thing to tell everybody that there's a problem. It's another thing to say there's a model for how to solve this somewhere, or a model to make progress against it that your politicians are ignoring or not supporting enough. Or it's here and it's happening, but the government won't fund it, or the government's getting in its way, or whatever it might be. So including in the micro, you have to include in the story these limitations and caveats. This is not going to solve 100% of the problem. This has some unintended consequences. It reaches one group but not another. It's really hard to scale. Whatever it works, but it's very slow. Whatever it might be. And in the macro, starting to think about pairing the solution story with the problem story and saying, well, here's the problem, just so you know. But here are some choices from some other communities about how they have dealt with this. Because everybody doesn't have the exact same problem, or everybody doesn't experience it equally bad. So why is this school district doing so much better than another school district? Well, sometimes it's money, it's something easy, or it's something obvious. But sometimes they have something really unique going. On my beat, I'm also often looking at public safety things. It's like, well, how did this neighborhood reduce their crime? Well, in some neighborhoods, it's because they're rich and police just patrol there all the time, and nobody wants to go there to try to do the wrong thing because they know the police will do whatever they want, and they won't, it'll be a big problem. But some communities have genuine strategies for how they've fought it. And digging into those helps, one, other communities learn, but also takes away the excuses of politicians who want nothing more than to say, "Oh, I'm already doing it. It's already done. We're doing all we can," or I would be doing it, but we can't for some such reason. Well, I'm just going to show everybody here another community that figured it out. And this is particularly important in solutions journalism because you can tell people this to tie it to this sort of subject of your goals. Here's why we're reporting this. Here's some examples. A bunch of outlets do this. A bunch of outlets that do solutions journalism a lot explain and fundraise with explanations of why they do solutions journalism and what it is. So there's the Narwhal in British Columbia. They're amazing climate outlet that wins tons of awards, including for their solutions reporting. And they wrote a big newsletter that they also published on their site about why. Why do we do this? Isn't journalism supposed to be about problems?
Alan, I might
Well,
just jump in again here because
sure.
I think this is, first of all, to say to everyone who's on the call or watching the recording, that the links to all of these case studies will be in a handout that you'll receive after the session. But also, before this session started, and we won't name any media outlets, but we were just ruminating on, Alan, that when we visit news websites, quite often, even news organizations that we know because we do training in solutions journalism, so we have an idea of who's doing what in the sort of media ecosystem. Media outlets that are doing some solution storytelling are not surfacing this on their websites. And in fact, one of the news providers that I visit every day, you actually have to scroll a long way before you find anything that is not, I suppose, if it bleeds, it leads, or sport. And so let's just talk about the value of what you're showing here in terms of positioning this as a product for audiences and communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the next one. Yes. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. I mean, these are basically kind of editors' pieces, give or take, that explain to your audience what we're doing. We're going to do solutions journalism, or we're going to do more of it, or this is what we do, and here's why we do it. Um, there are lots of great examples of fundraising around this that I'm also going to talk about later. We'll get to a little bit of that research around that. Um, but it helps people understand why you're doing this reporting. So there is a question in the chat that I thought was very insightful, which is, well, how do you separate this from journalism that's just there to advance a particular mission or advance a particular cause? That is a concern that some people have when they see solutions journalism. They say, "Oh, you're going to tell us how to solve the problem. You're going to talk to a bunch of experts and they're all academics and they're going to tell us whatever is going to solve the problem." By laying out what solutions journalism is and why you want to do it and how you're going to do it, you give uh, your audience a sense of uh, the purpose behind this, which, as the trivia question says, for people to make sense of what you're doing, there has to be some meaning behind it. What is the meaning of this reporting? If you don't tell them the meaning of it, they will fill in their own meaning. So what you want to do is tell them, what does this mean? Well, we want um, we want this community to actually succeed in solving problems, and our commitment to uncovering the problems has not always gotten us the results we wanted. So we're adding this in. Or, the narwhal one is very compelling about um, climate and how important it is that people have some sense that it can be solved and that there are choices for them in this and that there are options that governments can pursue and communities can pursue to stay safe and to stay healthy. And he spells that out and says, this is rigorous journalism. Here are some examples. You've probably read us doing it already and didn't even realize it. Here are some examples of this. Here's why we're going to do it. They turned that into a newsletter. They turned that into a fundraising appeal. A lot of these, there's a bunch of examples of people saying, we're going to try to do solutions journalism. Can you help us raise $10,000 to to build our solutions journalism out so that we can dedicate the resources to it? Here's what it is. It's not advocacy. It's not militant journalism to get you to do something. It's to pair with our problem reporting some options for how you might address these problems. And then you label it in stories too. You keep explaining the purpose of this. This is one of these is from Alabama, and one is from uh, somewhere in Texas. I wonder what that was. I forget what it was. I think it's linked, but um, we want to explore challenges in Texas and look for examples set by people trying to find answers that help. Or we want to report not only on the problems, but also solutions. And then that one links right back to the editor's note about what solutions journalism actually is. You can write these kind of bigger pieces. The one on the left is from Ideas Lab at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel in Wisconsin, which was very solutions focused. The one on the right is also from Alabama, and they said, you told us that you want us to explore how these problems might be solved, and we're going to do solutions journalism to deliver on that. And again, these can be repurposed into newsletters, these can be repurposed into fundraising appeals, these can be sent to board members, these can be sent to local nonprofits, however you want. I've seen it all with these things. And you can even share it with your sources. Now, like I said, I am a reporter also. I do this. And often I go in and tell people right off the bat, I do something called solutions journalism. What it means is I'm really interested in how your organization is getting the results it's getting. I would love to know more about how it works. I want to know the evidence, like what kind of numbers do you have behind this? What kind of stories do you have behind this? I'd love to know more about what you learned. And I'm not here to write a puff piece on you. I'm not here to cheerlead your organization. And so I would love for you to be able to be candid about what's hard, what's not working, what has been a struggle, imagine you're talking to another community that would want to set up a version of what you've been doing. What would you tell them? You wouldn't say, go do it and everything's fine. You'd say, ugh, here's the hard part. Here's the question we don't really have an answer to yet. Here's the problem we still face. And when you frame it that way, people love it. I cannot tell you how many times I have been told by people that I've interviewed for a story that I am the first slash only journalist that has ever explained what I'm doing, aside from I'm doing a story on blank. By giving them a little window into the process, they understand why I ask the questions that I ask. They're not suspicious of me. So when you're building trust in your community and you're building relationships in your community, the more you can explain, here's what I'm doing, here is why, here's my goal in doing this. I am interviewing you because I would love to learn about this so that other communities can be exposed to this idea and consider it for themselves or learn something from it. Um, I am going to ask you about what's going wrong in this or what's not perfect. I'm not trying to trick you into a gotcha question. I really want people to understand, and they will trust this more if you are candid and explain that it is not perfect. If I try to publish a thing that says it's perfect, they will not trust this. They will immediately understand that I am trying to sell them something. So we cannot do that. And everyone understands. I've never had somebody say no. And the response to people, to these outlets writing about solutions journalism is the same. They go, "Thank you for explaining it." And it doesn't, by the way, not only with solutions journalism, do it with everything you possibly can. Do it in your mission statement. Do it in your wherever you can. Explain why. Why are we reporting this? Why do we report the way we do? What do we want for this community? I think a reporter here named Brittany Schock says she likes to tell people um, that she does solutions journalism because she wants their town to win. And they'll never win if they just keep reporting on what's bad there. So they want to look at other communities that are winning on these issues and bring those ideas in to be considered. And people love it. They love it. And so find those places to talk about this. Now, on social media, I mean, like this extends to your homepage too. I mean, if you have any control of your homepage, as Corinne said, please put solutions journalism there. People will thank you for it. But it's on social media too. I love the way Reasons to Be Cheerful does their social media. They do little trivia questions on Instagram. They do a thing called Stats Sunday where they give little statistics from a story in their Instagram posts on Facebook and then link to the story so that you can read it. So they'll say, you know, there's been a big coral reforestation project in Belize. Um, how many acres of coral have they renewed? And you get to choose. And then they link to the story. They share other solution stories that they loved for the week. Uh, the New York Times, I love this. I have this tweet saved because it's perfect. Houston hasn't ended homelessness, but it shows progress is possible. Through cooperation, trust, and grinding effort, the city has made remarkable progress moving people from the streets into homes of their own. This story is like a 5,000 word mega feature that is fully solutions journalism. And this tweet is fully solutions journalism. It's not perfect, but they're making a ton of progress, and that is newsworthy. I love it. Don't get on social media and try to make your solution story an outrage story or something like that. When you're talking about it, lean into what is different about it. People want something different. So lean into that. You are doing something different. Tell people about it. Take credit for it. Get credit for it. You want that. I'm already talking about that. Lead with the solution. And the little bit of progress, the way I always tell people to talk about it on social media is when you read the story, imagine you're talking to a friend and you go, "Oh, I just read this really interesting story where blank happened." That blank is like your social media copy or your newsletter copy. "Oh, I just read this story where there's all these coral farmers in Jamaica and they go underwater uh, piece by piece to rebuild coral, and they've rebuilt, 20 acres of coral in 2 years. It's amazing." That little bit, that's your copy. You clean it up, but that's the idea. You don't say warming waters are bleaching coral and the planet is dying, but there's an initiative underway to address it. No, you lead with coral farmers have rebuilt 20 acres of coral in 2 years. It's hard. Here's how they did it. That's your solution story online. Don't go for the outrage. Don't go for the normal clicky stuff. Show that you're doing something different.
I might just, if you just go back to that slide for a moment there,
Sure.
Alan. A couple of years
Oh,
ago,
hold on.
oh, backwards. A couple of years ago, I was doing some work on training science journalists, and I find quite a strong overlap between traditional science journalism and solutions journalism. And I'll just explain that because I think it's maybe just another way of coming at this when we're thinking, particularly, there's a question in the chat box from someone about how do I persuade my editor to come on this journey? When you're pitching a story, I used to cover science for the BBC, and a typical top line for one of my stories would be researchers in X country have found that Y or Z is the case. So it might be, for instance, a new study published in The Lancet has found that, I don't know, eating donuts is bad for you, for instance. So the story is not too many of us are eating donuts and it's causing a cholesterol catastrophe. It's that the research is finding X. Now, I'm starting with a negative story because I want to just draw the comparison of if we think researchers or a new study have found a new drug compound is promising in the treatment of particular kinds of cancer, the hard news story might be more people are being diagnosed with a nasty form of cancer or a nasty form of whatever. The solutions approach is these folks have done some work on a novel compound that might be used to treat it. It's also, I think, good when we think about analogies for approaches to stories that are not public relations or puff pieces. So, for example, you'll sometimes find prominent manufacturers of, for example, chocolate will fund research that proves that chocolate is good for you. That's what one might call a puff piece or public relations, right? And so when I'm talking to a researcher about the kind of work that they've done, I was like, well, how effective is it? Have you done it in anything more than rats and mice? When are you thinking about doing your clinical trials? How many years away is this? Because for people who want to solve the problem of having a serious illness, they need to know the phrase, it's next year, it's 5 years away, it's 10 years away, it's we don't know how long it's going to take us to get there. So I hope this is helpful because when you're thinking about doing a solution story, it is what is the response to the problem that I'm going to cover? And then how well is it working? How easy would it be to do this in another part of the same neighborhood? For example, you gave the example of a school, Alan. Let's have a think about this school. What are they doing that might work elsewhere? What is it particularly about this school? Is it the way it's structured? Is it the way that it accepts students? Is it where it's located? There are lots of things that might make it difficult to transpose that. And those are the sorts of things that you're trying to bring out of your storytelling. So sorry to jump into there, but I
Oh,
think
that's just great.
the this bit of progress that you talk about on your slide here is really important. There's no silver bullet. There's no magic solution. It's always a step to get us towards addressing an issue. Back to you.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It's a step, it's an option, it's not the answer. As long as you don't frame it as the answer in the story or in how you talk about it, um, you're good. People will understand that you're showing them an option for this. And like I said, even the people who are very skeptical of news seem to get that when they read solution stories, that this is not telling them, do this. It's showing them, here's one way of approaching this problem. So what they find is if you talk about solutions journalism and you do solutions journalism, it has some benefits in terms of building trust and building connection with people. Now, we have heard from some outlets that solutions journalism stories are the most popular stories they do. And it's very easy to persuade them that keep doing that. They're like, great, I can do that. But sometimes they're not the most popular, but an interesting thing happens. Solutions journalism readers tend to be more loyal. They come back over and over again. Um, they come back 9.5 more times than 9.5 times more often than people who don't read solutions journalism, and they accumulate many more page views. They also seem to spend more time reading it. This is just one study, but we've seen this a bunch of times. People read it more. I myself have experienced this many times where I read a problem-focused story and I go, "Oh my God, I can't take this for another 2,000 words. I'm gonna lose my mind." But in a solution story, people keep reading. They want to know, wait, how did you do that? How did they figure this out? It keeps them hanging on. As one of my colleagues likes to say, you don't go to see James Bond movies because you think he's going to die. You go because you want to see how he gets out of it. So that's her version of a solution story. We're showing you, how did this community get out of this? And so it keeps people hanging on. And solutions journalism readers tend to be more likely to subscribe to newsletters, and people who subscribe to newsletters are more likely to pay. So you have some benefits here because even if your solution story doesn't go viral, it tends to connect to people who come back more often, read for longer, and subscribe to your newsletter, all of which are indicators of higher likelihood of paying for your journalism. So you want this. This is good. So talk about it. Tell people about this. It's a product, as Corinne said, it is a product, and let them know, here is the product, here is what it is, here's why we're doing it, and here's how we're going to do it, and you can support it. Your money goes to helping us do this. So lean into what makes it different and lean into how it makes your outlet different. That will help you in these relationships. People will identify this kind of reporting with you, and you will cultivate people who want to support your work. You will probably not have the biggest story that day, but you will find the people who want to pay money. It's not the only thing. So solutions journalism, like the stories themselves, it's not a silver bullet. Not going to solve everybody's revenue woes forever, but it helps. And every bit of research we've seen so far shows that it can really help. And you will cultivate people who are loyal readers and who want to support this, but you have to show them what they're supporting. Then you got to listen. So I have a doc for that I'm going to take you through. This is linked, and you will get this afterwards, and I think it might even get dropped into the chat.
It will
But
get dropped into the chat. You wait, just give me 10 seconds. Engagement sprint doc. That's
Wonderful.
the engagement sprint doc. Yep, excellent.
Yes.
So I'm just going to drop this into the chat. And for those of you who are watching the recording, you will receive a copy of this as a downloadable link. But if you're on the chat and you want to have a go at this as Alan is teaching the session, please just jump into the chat box and you should be able to download it directly. Back to you, Alan.
Yes. make a copy of it. I think you can only view this, so you may have to make a copy of it that you can mess around with. But basically, this is a little doc I came up with to help you start thinking about how to connect with your community differently, to actually build some relationships in a different way. Um, I credit a lot of people who helped make this, but it starts with a pretty simple question, which is deciding, do you want to connect with um, a piece of your audience, or do you want to connect with a part of your community? And the question is often one people don't think of. They think, oh, I want to connect with everybody. You have to pick. Sorry, that's how it is. If you try to design for everybody, you're going to design for nobody. So pick a group. You can always get bigger from there, but you can't shrink. So start small. Find the group you want to reach. Audience are people who support you sometimes or often. Uh, Community is people that are bound by some kind of commonality, and they may or may not have anything to do with your news organization. Um, if you want to think about this, I link to another doc in here from a wonderful journalist named Ariel Zarulnik, who is awesome and helps break down this delineation. And the goal through this doc, it's only 3 pages, but it's to take this sort of magical alchemy of meaningful engagement. Like, how did they do that? Journalists see successful kind of community engagement things. They go, how did you do that? It just seems like a good guess. Or maybe somebody dreamed something up and it was a flash of inspiration and it totally worked great by coincidence. But it doesn't have to be like that. You can systematize it. And so you can take weeks of work, and I think really get it done in about an hour looking at this if you're committed, maybe even less than that. And then there's another question sort of here in the middle of, do you know what your community needs? We're going back to the first question. Do you know what kind of information they want? Do you know how they get it? You may have to listen to them first. And if that's true, well, here's some questions to start thinking about, or to start asking them, or doing research around, or holding a focus group around. There's links um, in the after doc that you'll get about how to hold a focus group. And there's a couple guides to that in here too. There's a list of some options. That's a listening starter pack that I love. America Amplified has a guide for hosting events and things like that. How do you find out what your community needs? Well, you may have to go do that first, and that may be part of your work. Um, then once you have that, you may want to go even further. You may want to say, well, now I know their needs. I got to figure out how to meet those needs. Maybe just a story isn't going to do it. I got to think about that more. And you may want to go out in your community and do something else. You may want to hold a different kind of event, or you may want to make something new. You may want to make a zine or a podcast, or host an event where people get to it's interactive in some way. Who knows? You can let your imagination run wild. This is my favorite kind of thing. I've done this with the community I work with of people who've been incarcerated. I hosted a kind of art and interview show with them in New York City, pre-pandemic, and it was always a blast. And it came from just finding so many people in that community who were artists, and them saying, "Oh, we don't really have a place to do this. We don't have a place to do our poetry or our music. Nobody wants to hear about our prison stuff. People are going to judge us." I could have written a story about how formerly incarcerated artists have no place in New York City to share their art, or I could just give them the space. That's what we did. We just made the space ourselves, and then I would interview them, and we would have these really complex conversations. It was wonderful. You can do that. It's totally doable, and people love it. They love it. I've heard of newsrooms opening, uh, partnering with barbecue trucks to give out barbecue and beer to the community, and the journalists sit around and answer questions all day or field questions. I've heard of community baby showers where they collect uh, uh, materials for new moms. and give them out to mom, that the community donates, and then moms who can't afford it come get it, all held by news organizations. And never once have I ever heard anybody in those communities say, this isn't journalism. They're thrilled you're thinking about how to get through to them. They're thrilled you're meeting them wherever they are. So once you have that information of, my community has a need, my community has uh, there's some information that they want to know, then you got to figure out as you listen to them what their goals are. How can you help meet their goals? We talked about that earlier. Like things have to have a meaning, they have to have a purpose. So, what's their goal? What is all this concern they have, or worry they have, or struggle they have? What are they trying to do? What are they trying to do with it? They want better education. They want more funding for something. They want politicians to listen to them more, whatever it might be. And then think about the obstacles to that goal. What's preventing them? Sometimes there's stuff in the community, there's conflict, lack of resources, um, maybe skepticism of other groups, whatever it might be. And then there's stuff outside the group. There's systemic forces working on them to keep them from it. Well, now that you have a community and you have a goal and you have an obstacle to the goal, you can think about what's your purpose? And your purpose, I won't go into the whole thing here, but can guide you when you get lost, when you are trying to create something new for a community or for your audience. What's your purpose? Well, you can kind of do like I don't know if they're popular in Australia, but a Mad Libs kind of situation where we want to help this community achieve blank by something. And you can start there. Doesn't have to be specific. You won't know the answer totally yet. But you may say, well, the example I use, we want to help this neighborhood achieve policy progress on some issue by creating a direct line of communication between the neighborhood and local policymakers. You don't know what that looks like, but you've decided that they are really struggling to get politicians' attention around a legitimate issue that they have, and we're going to try to help with that um, by doing something.
Alan,
We're going to try to create that line of communication.
yeah, Alan, we have about 15 minutes left on the
Mhm.
call, and we've got a few questions coming in. So
Great.
no, that's okay if we maybe finish, but this is such a valuable document. And so
Yes.
if we spend another 5 minutes just talking people through, you can
Oops.
spend a little bit longer,
Hold
just
on.
talking people how to use it,
Yes.
that would be fantastic. And then we
You
can spend the
just,
last 10 minutes on questions.
yeah, you'll just go through this. And the last two questions are really kind of about brainstorming. What might this look like? Let your imagination run wild. Where could you hold the thing? What format could it arrive in? Does it need to be digital? Does it need to be printed out? Does it need to be analog? Does it need to be, what neighborhood could it be in? Whatever it might be, whatever kind of thing you're crafting. And this will seriously solve weeks of work that journalists sort of can't stop, you know, grinding their teeth over, and it systematizes it. And you will, by the end of this, have so much of a better sense of other kinds of value outside of just story about problem on our website than you would have otherwise. So we'll get back to this, and you'll have that, and it has my email on it, so you can always email me if you have questions. Then you've got to bring it back to your community, because it's really tempting for people to say, our roads are terrible. And then you go report a story that says our roads in this community are terrible. But you have to resist that. I mean, you can do that, but that can't be all you do. An organization here that was doing solutions reporting and was doing this kind of community engagement where they were fielding questions from people. What do you want us to cover? What do you want to know about your city? It was in Chicago. They found that as they talked to people who submitted questions, implicit in the problem question was, what do we do about it? They didn't just want to know why the roads were terrible or why they didn't get garbage collected or why the schools were bad or whatever. They wanted to know what could be done about it. So answer both things. Go back to your community and think about, how do we answer this in a lot of different ways? Yes, they have a question about the problem, but also explore the solution. And you can do that. You don't have to do anything huge to get started. You start right where you are. You pivot right on your beat. You can talk to the same people you're talking to about what's working. The academics you know, the experts you know, the politicians, the whatever, the researchers, the community advocates. Say, wait, is there anybody doing anything that's working? And they will be so happy, especially researchers who are sick of talking about the same thing over and over again. They will be delighted to tell you about the weird project in some corner of the country or the region or city that nobody knows about, that they researched, that's on page 67 of their report that nobody got to. And that's where I find a ton of stories, like the very end of a report where they go like, but it doesn't have to be this way, like in the corner. And I'm like, then I call that organization or that city and I say like, can I learn more about that? Look for what we call positive deviance. So when journalists look at data, we like to find the worst thing, the thing that's getting worse the fastest. Well, do the opposite. That's the fastest definition of positive deviance. Who's doing the best? Who's improving the quickest? Even if they're not the best, who's improving a lot? There's something to be learned from their improvement. Maybe it's worth looking into. How did you do that? How did the city get so much better so quickly at this thing? And just keep asking, who's doing it better? Who's doing it better? And start thinking about getting solutions journalism to people who are experiencing the problem, which is often not a newsroom's audience, unfortunately. I was just talking to someone who was trying to plan and engage a meaningful engagement around youth issues, issues around Latino youth in a rural area. And she was a public radio reporter. And that's usually like old, rich white people listen to that. And I said, do you think your great story about these issues is going to reach uh, the Latino youth in this rural area? And she said, no, absolutely not. Of course not. And she said, that's why I want to do something else, because they're never going to hear this story. And so she started thinking about, well, what can I do to get the solutions ideas to them, to let them know, hey, this is what another community did, or here are some options within our own government that could help you kind of advocate for yourselves so that you have access to all of these resources. Maybe you need a different format. That's what that doc is for. Maybe you need an event. Maybe you need to print stuff out. Maybe you need to circle back to those people that you talk to who are the community advocates and say, can you help me share this? I did this story that is really about another community or some place that has figured out a piece of this problem, and I really want to get it to them, but frankly, they don't pay attention to us. We know this. We're working on it. Can you help me? People will help. Can you find a way to be ethically in a space where people share info? You can't just roll into people's personal spaces and start distributing, newspapers. But can you find ways to be in the places where they share info, whether it's Facebook groups or Reddit threads or whatever it might be, or community spaces? Can you be there? Can you find a way to be present there to get them that knowledge? And you can do it anywhere. Once you report the problem, make it a series. Report the problem for two, one version I saw was, here's the horrible problem. That's the first part. The second part was, here's how we got here, the historical kind of context. And the last part was, here's what another state that's similar to us did about this. It can be long form and investigative. My most recent piece was 3,000 words. The New York Times one I talked about was probably 4,000 or 5,000 words. I never counted it, but it's very, very long. You can do a podcast. You could do standalone. If it's a very well-known problem, you can do 800,000 words on it, 2 or 3 minutes on TV or radio, totally doable. Why not make cartoons and comic strips. It's been done. We've seen it. There's a one in Brazil that was wonderful. That was all about how favelas were fighting back against COVID, keeping people safe. It won all these awards. It was done in Poland about Brazil with Brazilian artists, and it was beautiful. It was like a digital cartoon online, and it was wonderful. Fully solutions journalism. People went crazy for it. You can do anything. So think about all the different ways you can do that. So doing solutions reporting does not mean overhauling everything. It means that you're working differently, that you're telling people about it, and that you're trying to think about other ways to get people information um, in new ways rather than just more information all the time or being bigger and louder about the problem. So admit what you don't know. Think about how your uh, reporting contributes to public life, to civic life? Is it contributing in a positive way, or is it fostering some things that we don't want to foster? We're doing it unintentionally a lot, but we have to think about that. We have to acknowledge that people are thinking about this information differently, that they receive information differently. Um, Explain what we're doing. What is the goal of our reporting? And tell people about that. We have to listen. We have to listen. We cannot keep trusting our editorial judgment. It's frequently wrong, which is fine. It's not a bad thing. It's not a moral judgment. It's just true. No one can guess what masses of people need to know all the time. So listen to them and then build a circle. Once you've learned all of this from your community and you're valuing them, how do you bring that back to them and demonstrate to them that their interests and their well-being and their progress in this community is valuable to you? And now we can just chat.
Thanks so much, Alan. That was absolutely fascinating. I've been back through the questions, and I think you've picked up most of them. One of the questions I wanted to put to you, though, it's from Lee Wei, and it's really around the process of, whether an individual journalist would like to do some of these types of projects or stories. Often depends upon buy-in from or permission from an editor. And so really some top tips on bringing editors along on the journey with you. And I suppose one of the things that I might mention here as we sort of start on this is not just in your role, in your current role, that's probably fairly straightforward because you are the online engagement manager at the Solutions Journalism Network. So not a hard door to push open, but you were self-employed as a freelancer for many years before. So just thinking about, folks who have to bring somebody on the journey, what are your top 2 or 3 tips?
So one is knowing your audience. This is something I learned from talking to people in the network, which is that some newsrooms that do a lot of solutions journalism want you, when you pitch them, to demonstrate your knowledge of solutions journalism. And so if you are going to, I just wrote for the Christian Science Monitor, and me saying I deeply know solutions journalism was very important to them because they want to do it. And if I were pitching the Narwhal, I would say, I know solutions journalism very well, and I'm going to do this story in solutions journalism fashion. And my pitch would have the 4 pillars of response, evidence, insights, limitations. But some editors and outlets are totally allergic to that, even if they're doing it. They may not know they're doing it. And actually, there was just a question in the chat about people doing it and maybe not knowing that it had a name or it not even having a name at that point in time, which I think is a good question also. But there are some places where if you say I do solutions journalism, they go, oh, no, that's fluffy. No, we don't do that. We don't want to tell people about solutions. That's not our job. And what I found from talking to freelancers and newsroom people who do this work with editors who don't like that kind of stuff is you pitch it to them as just, oh my gosh, there's this really interesting thing happening. We talk all the time about gun violence, and it's just kind of hard to find a fresh angle, but gosh, there's this initiative in these neighborhoods that's really, really having an impact. I would love to report on it would just be really fresh to report on how this is happening because people are so stuck in how bad everything is. They pitch it as just, this is a really curious, sort of fresh take on this thing that we talk about all the time. And they never say solutions journalism. And they never say, that they don't use that kind of language or the four pillars or any of that. They just say, this is a new kind of take on this that I think would be really fresh for the audience. And people have a lot of success with that, both freelancing and in newsrooms. So I think you have to know where you're pitching to or who you're pitching to. Is your editor trying to find new ways to connect with audiences, or communities? Is your editor kind of game for experimenting? Or is your editor, the old school shoe leather kind of stuff, and that you just have to frame it differently? It's very rare that people are just fully not ever going to cover a progress happening. You just have to frame it differently. So I would definitely uh lean into that, like trying to figure out who your
Mm.
audience is there, and then also just once if you can find a way to get one or two going, usually there's a response to those stories, whether you're a freelancer and you go, oh look, I've been in these good publications, or that shows, look, hey, you don't know me, but I'm serious. Or, you get good comments or things around the stories on social media, you get some emails and stuff, and then you show it to your boss and you say, hey, I know that story wasn't huge, but getting really, really good feedback on it. Could I try another one? I have another idea. And when you can show them some results, once you get your foot in the door, it really, really helps. So I would try to lean into those things. Yeah, trick them into it, Allison. You sort of have to, you have to wrap the dog's medicine in some meat sometimes to have them eat it.
I suppose if we think about that in a slightly more formal way as well, if we're thinking about introducing a new product, for example, let's say a newsletter that's targeted towards a specific group of subsection of your audience, or it's on a specific type of theme, if you design these things up front with what are the sorts of metrics we need to capture, and there are wonderful resources on the Solutions Journalism Network website. You can also visit the Constructive Institute website. There's some great resources from an organization in Germany, which is called the Bonn Institute, which really kind of walks the middle line between solutions and constructive and is very news focused. So there's a growing body of organizations that are providing this kind of guidance, but particularly around metrics, so that you can think, what is it that I need to measure, not just to help me do this well for the target audience and community, but also to bring my news organization along for the ride, when we're doing something that's perhaps a pilot and scale experiment that we want to sit along what we might call business as usual. Dear friends, we've got one last question, so we will go a minute over time, but just a minute. That's a broad question. Do we see constructive as different to solutions journalism?
Cousins, or like squares and rectangles. Like all solutions journalism is constructive, but not all constructive is necessarily solutions journalism. Constructive typically we see as a bit wider of an umbrella, would be the fastest. A lot of journalism that's kind of healthier may not focus on solutions, but may approach the practice kind of in healthier ways, bringing more complexity to it, or bringing explainers and things like that to people that we would say is constructive, but maybe not solutions journalism. But all solutions journalism typically is constructive. So they're pals. We all love each other. Last year, the Bonn Institute had their first conference, and I and a colleague presented there about this kind of stuff. So totally, Yeah.
Cousins. I like the idea of cousins. That's such a great way of describing it. Dear friends, what that means is we can finish on time. So I have just tremendous gratitude to Alan Arthur, online engagement editor at the Solutions Journalism Network, and of course to our broader partnership with the Solutions Journalism Network, between us and the Solutions Journalism Network and us at the Walkley Foundation, that's making this series of programs possible. Everything will be uploaded to our website, and we would encourage you to engage with it, particularly if you're thinking about, and you will need to be an Australian citizen to apply for this or have working rights in Australia to apply for this, a grant that we will announce later in the year to support solutions journalism storytelling. So with that, I will wish you all a wonderful day. And Alan, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'll just say I just dropped a link in here in response to a good question about how you do this if you're a small team. You are really rushing, you really want to do solutions journalism. I just dropped a link in here called How to Do Solution Stories in Days, Not Weeks. That came from a very small rural outlet in Wyoming in the United States that you may want to click on and save for yourself because I think it is doable, but it does take some effort and it does take intentionality behind that. So I'll throw that in there. And I just can't thank you all enough for having me. I hope it was helpful and it was a joy to do. So thank you.